What's up, scholars? Welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be taking some time to look at Luffy's character. He is one of the neatest characters that I've come across in fiction, and honestly one of the best MCs I've ever seen. And a lot of people have said, or I've heard people like in my comment section say that they've heard people talk about how they don't think Luffy has grown at all, that he's a very stagnant character, and I am here to talk about why that's not true. Luffy is a character that changes a lot. It is subtle changes in his character, but he has had a lot of change and a lot of growth from the time we meet him in Romance Dawn up until, to the point I am at right now. I'm in Punk Hazard, about to finish Punk Hazard. Even up till Punk Hazard, there's massive differences between just those two, and the journeys he's gone through, everything he's encountered, the experiences he's had, the people that he's met, the confrontations, everything, the trauma that he's had. All of these things kind of compile into Luffy's character, where you see him and he still has those lovable, goofy traits that he had when we first were introduced to him. But at the same time, there's so much difference between what we see now versus what we saw then. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time to talk about Luffy as a character and do a quick little character analysis of him. Obviously, it's not all the way through to current One Piece because I'm not caught up yet. So I'm going off of what I know about Luffy and his character, because I just want to talk about it. So what I'm going to do, I have it all on my computer here. I made a PowerPoint for this video because I just wanted to. I felt like it was an easier way for me to track what I wanted to talk about with Luffy. So what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to scooch over this way. Yeah. So I'm going to scooch over here for this video, and I'm probably going to put the slides or some sort of chart or something over here for comparison for Luffy's character. So it may not be here the entire time, but there will be some sort of chart here for Luffy's character to track his growth. So let's go ahead and start this. We're going to start in the very first saga, East Blue, and talk about when Luffy was first introduced as a character. So in East Blue, this is where, of course, this is the beginning of the series. This is when we're first introduced to all of our characters, Luffy being the first one we meet. When we first meet him, he is a very happy-go-lucky, very goofy character. He's super silly. He really plays into the gimmicks of his body being rubber, and he's very blunt, very forthcoming with information. He shares his dream with anybody who asks about it, and anybody who doesn't ask about it, really. He just says that he wants to be king of the pirates to anyone who will listen to him. In the East Blue Saga, he is also very naive. We know a lot about his childhood due to post-war, but even with what we know of his childhood with Ace and Sabo and Dadan and Garp and the whole situation with that, Luffy is still very naive about the world, because even though he knew something had killed Sabo because of what had happened, he still didn't know who. Essentially, he didn't know who killed Sabo. And there was, since he was a kid, there's just kind of this naivety that comes along with that, as he doesn't really understand or grasp at how big of a moment that is, this understanding of freedom versus captivity, and knowing that Sabo wasn't free and he wants to be free. So there's a lot of that as a child he wasn't fully able to grasp onto. As an adult, as we go along this series, he is able to grasp it. But when we're introduced to him in East Blue, there is still this naive tendency that Luffy carries himself with how he approaches the Marines, with how he approaches recruiting members for his crew. There's a lot of this ideation in his mind that nobody's going to turn him down whenever he asks them to join his crew. That's why he doesn't take no for an answer. When Zoro at first does not want to be part of the crew, Luffy's just like, hey, you're going to be a great swordsman. And Zoro finally, he consents, and then they start teaming up. And same with how they recruit Usopp, and then Sanji, because Sanji was telling him no and Luffy would not take no for an answer, and eventually Sanji joins the crew. The only one it was different with was with Nami's recruitment in Arlong Park. That's when she officially became a member of the crew. She was along for the ride beforehand, but she didn't like officially join until after Arlong Park. But that is where we get to see another part of Luffy's character, is this protectiveness that he has for the people he cares about. For the people he chooses to love and care about are the people he is most fiercely protective over. We've seen it several times throughout the series, and our first glimpse of it was in East Blue. We saw it with how he protected Zoro and even Kobe. We saw it in how he fought with Usopp, and then with Sanji and Zev, and then in Arlong Park it culminates to a climactic point with Nami's recruitment and Luffy not knowing anything about Nami's past. He doesn't know what happened to her. He just sees her on the ground crying, and she asks him to help. And that's all it takes, because in his mind, she is his navigator. She is already part of their crew, and therefore is somebody to be protected, somebody he is willing to fight for. And that value that he has to his friends, to his crew, is something that only continues to grow. It buds in East Blue, and you see this forming found family around the original group, where they're starting to value one another. They're starting to learn how to work together, and Luffy is the glue, literally, that is tying them all together at this point, because of the way he is willing to fight for them, because of the way he values them, and because of the way he recruited all of them to him. He has this way of drawing people in, and people gravitate towards him, and that is why this crew, this misfit crew, that has a captain who doesn't know how to navigate, who can't swim, who doesn't know anything about the world or the functions of the world, knows nothing about the seas, can't cook or anything like that. That is why he's their captain, because he sees the value in them as people. He sees who they are, and he values them for their role in the crew, of course, but he values them individually for what they mean to him, and that's what makes a difference. That's why they're willing to go along with all of his antics and everything that he does, is because he sees them for them, and that value and loyalty he has for them is incredible. But alongside those beautiful, beautiful traits, there's also the more goofy traits of him being super stubborn, which we see when he refuses to take no for an answer. And he's stubborn in his fights as well, whether it was against like Don Krieg or Arlong, any of the fights that he had, even Kuro in Syrup Village. He's very stubborn when it comes to fighting and when it comes to what he thinks. He's also very reckless. He's very determined. He has that sense of adventure where he wants to go, but most important, he's very joyful. He's a very happy, joyful person, and that joy just radiates off of him, and it's very infectious. That's part of what draws people in to Luffy. He is just so naturally happy, and that joy just brings people into him. And by the end of the East Blue Saga, we see Luffy not only wanting to be Pirate King, but he wants to be the king of the pirates with the crew he's assembled, with these friends. And that is our introduction to Luffy. All of these different things is just the introduction to this character. That is like the tip of the iceberg that we get at the very beginning of One Piece. And then we get into the Alabasta Saga, which is where his character starts getting fleshed out a little bit more, like tidbits and tidbits start getting fleshed out. He's still silly, he's still goofy, he still exhibits all of the character traits that he did in East Blue, because that is who he is as a character, as a person. But Alabasta starts showing a little bit more of like the serious undertones, kind of like what we saw in Arlong Park. With the situation on Drum Island when Nami is sick, how determined he is to get her up to the doctors so that she can be treated, and the same way he carries Sanji with Nami up the mountain to be treated, how he approaches Wapol, and the way he holds Hero Luke's flag in place of Chopper when that whole situation's happening. The way he cares about Vivi and their whole relationship dynamic, the whole entire Alabasta arc when they get to Alabasta and they have to go up against Crocodile, and we get to see Luffy more serious because he finally has what I would consider like the first real serious opponent that he has, that he's lost against, and it's Crocodile. We get to see him struggle and think through and figure out how he's going to win, because he doesn't want to lose, because he has friends to protect. He has promises that he's made to Vivi that he wants to upkeep, and he will do anything to make sure that happens. And we see him put his body on the line in this arc several times in order to make Vivi's wishes come true, in order to keep his promise to Vivi. And I think one thing that I truly love about Luffy's character is that he is a very thoughtful person, but we don't see his thought process majority of the time. He doesn't really have inner monologue. We don't really see a lot of inner monologue from him. We see his actions as his inner monologue. What he does is what he's thinking about. And we see this portrayed in several different ways throughout the series, but in this arc specifically, in ways he deals with Vivi, like how he punches her out of nowhere and they don't understand why, but then he explains, like, why would you think you're doing this on your own? We're your friends, we're coming too, you don't have to fight alone. That whole process of him really just like hammering it to her, saying you're not doing this by yourself. And that thoughtfulness extends beyond just that. He's very thoughtful in how he's thinking of how he's going to fight Crocodile, of how he can win, how he can do this, what he's going to be doing for his friends, how they're going to approach this situation. But Luffy is so blunt and he's so goofy at times that you don't think that he's thinking a lot of things. Like the looks in his eyes, you really don't think there's a thought behind his eyes, but there is. But we're just not let into it. We're not let in to what he's thinking. I think that's a very cool part to his character, is because even though we're not shown it, he is constantly thinking, and he has more grasp, I would say, of the emotional parts of other people than some, because he's able to get what people are feeling, what they're struggling with, and he's able to act accordingly with it. I think it's something that is very, very, very undermentioned for Luffy's character, because he is able to see the heart of what people are going through, the heart of what their problem is, and I really love that about him. And his loyalty to those he loves is just amplified in this arc, especially because once he's pretty much taken Vivi in as a Straw Hat, an honorary Straw Hat, he has this love and compassion for her like he does his own crewmates, and that's what makes him do all of this. He doesn't really, he's not even doing it just because it's Alabasta. He doesn't care if it's just one random kingdom. He's doing it because it's Vivi's kingdom, and because he is loyal and he cares about Vivi, he cares about her people and her kingdom. It's so cool to see his morality on display, because yes, he's a pirate. He has typical actions of a pirate at times, but then there's moments like this where he's not necessarily heroic, but he is a hero to those he loves. Even though Luffy doesn't want to be called a hero, he doesn't like being called a hero, he has these heroic moments to those he loves, to those he cares about, to those he chooses to defend. And in their eyes, he is the one who has saved them, he is the one who has helped them, and that makes him their own personal hero in a sense, which is why I think Vivi has such a deep care and respect for Luffy by the end of this arc, because of everything he did for her, even when he didn't have to. He didn't have to do everything for Vivi, but because of how much he trusted her and was loyal to her and grew to care and love her, he did it without complaint. I love Luffy. I love his character. And Alabasta did such a good job of just portraying these positive traits from Luffy to show how much he's willing to do for those he loves. And in this arc, we really get to see the character growth as he's starting to think more about his actions. Like when Vivi stops him from just immediately going into a brawl when they get to Drum Island. And Vivi stopping him and telling him, like, no, you can't do this. This is what we need to do instead. Him taking the time to actually stop and listen. And then we see that just like chapters later in Drum Island when Sanji is telling Luffy, like, you cannot fight. You can't fight with Nami or Nami's gonna die. That seriousness where his instant urge is to fight, is to act without thinking, but then you have these characters that he loves and respects that are telling him to stop and wait, to stop and think. And that's what gets him to take a step back, and he starts being more introspective about what the situation is. He starts to analyze it more. And Alabasta really starts showing the growth that he has to be able to think through things calmly without immediately resorting to a fight. And that thoughtfulness without immediately resorting to a fight comes into play in Skypiea, or in Jaya specifically, in the bar when they are being made fun of for their dreams and wanting to go to the sky, and Luffy doesn't fight back. Luffy and Zoro take the hate, take the hits, and don't say a word, don't retaliate one bit, because he's able to think through things and be like, no, this is exactly like the situation with Shanks. Like, this is not something to retaliate over. This is not something to fight over. We'll just stay quiet. We'll let it run its course, and we're just going to move on. And in Skypiea, I think Skypiea, it's one of my favorite sagas. Skypiea, the arc itself, is one of my favorite arcs just because of all the lore, history, and everything that we get. I really love it. I think it's underrated for Luffy's character development because it can be overshadowed a lot in the arc, but we really get a sense for like one of the first times, I guess, in like the earlier sagas, the grasp of the importance of dreams and freedom to Luffy. And it culminates with Blackbeard's introduction when we meet him and he tells Luffy that dreams never die. The dreams of man will never die. And Luffy, hearing that, takes it to heart, and they know that there are others out there that have that same passion for dreams that they do. He's not alone in it. Blackbeard is not alone in it. There are others out there. And Luffy, the freedom he wants to go wherever he wants to go, to explore everything that he wants to. And we get this later on in Sabaody. I don't want to skip ahead, but I'm kind of skipping ahead. I'll talk about it more in Sabaody. But we get this first realization that he wants to be king of the pirates, not to be at the top of the world per se. He wants to be king of the pirates, to be the freest man in the world. And Skypiea is the first embodiment of that freedom, as he's wanting to go to a place that nobody really goes to. He wants to go travel in the sky. He wants to go to this sky island where nobody believes he can go, where nobody thinks it's possible to go, but yet he finds a way to have the freedom to go there, to travel there with the people he wants to go with. And that dream and the realization, especially when he beats Bellamy and points to the sky and he just says, I'm going to the sky. It's such good embodiment for the dreams and the freedom and the wishes that Luffy has as a character, because it embodies who he is. He's a very free spirit, and he has the biggest dream to be king of the pirates. Like, that is a huge dream. That's not a dream for the faint of heart. Even the dream of going to the sky was not for the faint of heart because of the method you had to get to the sky. So there's a lot of big dreams that Luffy has, and the way he finds ways to accomplish it just displays the freedom that he has and the freedom that he wants to have and continues to gain. And the ringing of the bell at the end and his shadow being displayed across the sky down below to to Nolan's descendants, to them down there. That's just another representation of the freedom and the bells are ringing, and he's just showing how free he is in that situation, and that he upkept his promise. He kept a promise to someone he had barely met, but they had been wronged, they had been mocked and scorned, and he had seen that. He had a personal connection with them. He went to the sky not just because it was his own desire, but to fulfill a dream of somebody else, for them to have their dream fulfilled of having that bell ring, and he did it. And that is also where, for Luffy's character, we really finally get a true connection with him and Goldie Roger. We had it, I mean, the connections have been there since the beginning, and they keep on floating around, but the connection that Roger also displayed that sense of freedom and the dream of going to the sky, and he went to the sky as well, and Luffy is kind of following in the footsteps of the former pirate king, the one he's trying to become. So it's so cool to see how his character, though from what I know different than Roger, displays some of the same characteristics as him. I really love this arc, this saga for Luffy's character, because we get to see some of the bigger themes of his dreams and of freedom starting to get explored here, and that adds so much depth to his character. But then we get to Water 7, so I'm splitting these up because there's a lot of growth that happens in like Water 7, Enies Lobby, and then so on and so forth, so I'm gonna kind of split these up. But Water 7 is one of the biggest tests for Luffy as a captain, the loyalty he feels for his crew, the love he has for his crew, and that arc still makes me cry. I still cry. Him and Usopp in that arc, the character growth those two have individually is astounding. But for Luffy, his determination to do whatever he can to keep his crew together, the love and loyalty he has not just for his crew but to their ship, the Going Merry. He wants to do anything he can to help the Merry, and when it finally is sunk into his brain because of Iceberg saying that the Merry can't be fixed, Luffy puts on the captain's hat per se and really puts his foot down. It's like, we're getting a new ship. And that sternness that he has is such a big step for him. And that, of course, it leads to the fight with Usopp and everything. But that moment is so big for Luffy. It is a huge step in his character progression because he has been the captain, he has acted as captain, but now what captain means is being put to the test, and Luffy is showing his grit and his determination to remain a captain, that it can be respectable and not letting just anybody walk over him. He has to stand his ground. He has to do what's best for the crew, and getting a new ship was what's best. The situation was messy. It wasn't explained well on either side. He's a little hot-headed. They all are. They were really hot-headed in that situation. I'm not saying Luffy's a perfect character, because he's definitely not. He had his faults in this arc with how he handled the whole situation with the Merry, like presenting it to Usopp. Usopp had his faults with how he responded to Luffy in the situation. So it's messy, and it's messy, but it's still really good, and it's a good character moment for Luffy. But also what gets brought up in this arc is this newfound desperation, especially after Usopp leaves and the whole situation with Robin starts to come up. This desperation of trying to keep his crew together, of not losing anybody else, because deep inside, Luffy has a very deep fear of losing people, which I think stemmed from losing Sabo as a child. This fear of losing people is like instilled in him, and as someone who is so dependent on others but also just thrives off of the company of others, he is very much a people person. He enjoys having people around him, and the first thought of having these people disappear from him and leave him is starting to make this desperation and panic grow inside of Luffy, something that we haven't seen before. And if Usopp hadn't left and this whole situation with Robin hadn't happened, we wouldn't have seen kind of this undertone of Luffy that Luffy has concerning his fear of people leaving. It also brings up the first fact of him not being strong enough, the potential of him not being strong enough to protect the ones he loves. And that leads us to Enies Lobby, where we are really shown the extent Luffy will go to for the ones he loves. The determination to get Robin back, the selflessness that he displays for his entire crew in order to get Robin back. And speaking of the extent he goes to for the ones he loves, the self-destructive tendencies that he has. He is literally willing to destroy his own body, to take years off of his life with Gear 2 and Gear 3, just in order to bring himself to a point where he is strong enough to defeat the opponents in front of him, to defeat the ones who are keeping him from having his crew together. That itself is wild. And even if someone was to look at just from East Blue to Enies Lobby and say that Luffy hasn't changed, I'd call them crazy, because there's huge changes that he's underwent. Not just physically, but like mentally and emotionally. He has changed a lot from East Blue to Enies Lobby. There's a lot of growth, there's a lot of things that he's experienced, there's a lot of challenges that he's faced, and the people he's met has greatly influenced how he acts and his mindset and his knowledge going forward into the world. And that stand against the world government when he says, I know who Robin's enemy is, Soge can shoot down that flag. I mean, that is huge character development and growth for Luffy. Are you kidding me? Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And he has a deep love for his crew. This love of his crew, this friendship and bond that he has with them, is what is able to keep him going. I know people like dismiss the power of friendship a lot because they don't like it as much. But in this case, it's used in a very interesting way as a motivator for Luffy. Like when he's fighting Lucci and he falls and Usopp takes off the mask and starts screaming at Luffy, and Luffy realizes that Usopp is there, and Usopp is telling him like, get up, we're going back together, and Luffy gets back on his feet and says, of course we will. Like, that moment is so powerful, not just for Usopp, but for Luffy, because Luffy, who has been fighting and fighting and fighting because he's so scared of losing another person of his crew. He's so scared of losing someone, and he's downright exhausted. He's exerted all of his energy, all of his power, and he's about out of gas pretty much. He's like almost giving up, and then he sees the person who he thought had abandoned him, who he thought had left for good, and they came back to help the crew get this person back, get Robin back. And this person is yelling at Luffy to get up because they're gonna go back together. Just, of course that's gonna make Luffy get back up. Of course Luffy's gonna get back on his feet, because that hope is reinvigorated in him, that desire and that drive and determination to say, I'm not gonna lose anyone. I haven't lost anyone yet, because he is still here. Usopp is still here. He's up there fighting for Robin. I'm not gonna let them go. I'm not gonna let them disappear on me. And then he gets up to fight again. It gives me chills. It's so good. And it's not just the love like that. Like when he makes Robin admit that she wants to live. Like, yes, that is the most powerful Robin moment ever, but it's a powerful moment for Luffy as well, for him to recognize that she is lying to herself, that she is having this inner turmoil and she's not wanting help because she's scared, and he is there openly declaring that he will do anything for her. He doesn't care who his enemy is, he doesn't care what he's up against, as long as he knows that she wants to live, that she is wanting to go with them. That is the only thing that he needs to know. And the way he continues to encourage her to say, the way he keeps shouting at her, he'd be like, we can talk about this whole thing later. Tell me you want to live. Tell me you want to come with me, and we can discuss all the other stuff later. And when she finally says it, Luffy's like, okay, let's go. That confirmation was all he needed to put everything into getting her back. Just the amount of love that he has for his crew, for his family, is just astounding. But with Enies Lobby comes the biggest realization. Even after Gear 2 and Gear 3, he realizes that in order to keep his crew with all of these enemies that are showing up stronger and stronger, he has to be stronger. That leads us to Post-Enies Lobby, where while Post-Enies Lobby is a very small arc, there is still some character moments in there for Luffy. Mainly him being captain, with Zoro putting his foot down on the whole Usopp situation, and Luffy being captain has to have his foot down on the situation too. He can't just let Usopp come back. Usopp has to apologize. That moment for Luffy, that self-control he has to exert in the situation, because of course he just wants to accept Usopp back on the crew without any big thing. The way he is like, no, you're right, he has to come to us. Again, it's one of those things where he steps back and listens to others, able to take a back seat and realize what's going on, be like, nope, you know what, you're right, we need to do it this way. Of course, we get more of like his family history with Dragon and Garp, and we get all of those connections and implications, which adds even more layers to his character just as a whole because of the connections he has to everyone. But we also get this friendship / rivalry with Kobe that really shows how complicated of a character Luffy is, because it would be so easy that now that Kobe is a Marine, for him to be like, nope, we're just enemies now, I'm sorry. But he's not. He says, we're still friends. We may be enemies, we may be on opposing sides, but you are still my friend, and I'm going to treat you as such. We may end up fighting one day, and you may have to stop me one day, but that'll be a good fight, and we'll still be friends. Like, how can you not love this boy? How can you not love this boy and see how much he's grown? Thriller Bark was a big Zoro arc and a big arc for our newest member, Brook, but there was a few moments for Luffy in there. All throughout pre-time skip, we still get to see, even with all these huge leaps that Luffy makes as a character, he's still to his core a very silly character. He's very goofy, has these jokes, he's just a goofy character. But the longer the series goes, his goofiness is still there, but there's a lot more depth to his character added onto it. He's not just a silly, goofy character, he's a lot more than that. But we see a lot of that silliness in Thriller Bark concerning Luffy, like with Monster Luffy, or him pushing the zombie back down into the grave. But with Monster Luffy, again, we're shown how far he's going to go to save his friends, and also this moment of acceptance with Brook, with him being a skeleton, how first of all he accepts Brook right off the bat, and then after learning Brook's story with Laboon and his history with everything, the way Luffy is just so caring and so loving towards Brook from the get-go. And when Brook asks, can he join his crew, and Luffy's like, yeah, of course. It's those subtle moments that just really makes me love Luffy's character even more. Then we get to Sabaody, which is a huge Luffy arc, because actions have consequences. And his actions, while he was defending Hachi in the slave house when he punched the celestial dragon, he was protecting Hachi, he was venting his anger, he was doing what we all wanted him to do. He knew they were going to have consequences because of what Hachi had told him, and he apologized for it. He's like, I'm sorry, we're going to have to face these consequences. And the crew thought they were ready, but they weren't. When Kizaru and Kuma show up and all of that just sadness and chaos is happening on Sabaody, we really see the extent of Luffy's desperation and his weakness. His desire to protect his crew is getting him nowhere, and that leads to panic and his desperate acts to fight Kuma, to run after his crew to grab them before Kuma can make them disappear, and how he is just left dumbstruck and unable to properly voice anything. And then he falls to the ground and he's crying and he says, "I'm so weak, I couldn't save anyone. I couldn't protect any of them." It's such a huge moment for his character, because these ideas, these thoughts that he's had from the previous arcs of saying, "Oh, well, I need to get stronger, I need to get stronger," has come to fruition. His greatest fears of losing the ones he cares about and not being strong enough to care for them and to protect them have come true. And he's left by himself. He is left alone. And that emotional sequence of him crying and just not able to do anything is gut-wrenching, because while it shows how much he needs to grow and he realizes how much stronger he needs to get, it's that just horrible, horrible, empty feeling Luffy has of knowing that he could have potentially lost everyone. Everyone. And of course, in Sabaody, we get the whole thing of the story with the King of the Pirates, with Rayleigh, and how Luffy doesn't want to hear anything about the One Piece because he still wants to go on this journey by himself. That plays into kind of the whole freedom aspect. He wants to do this by himself. He wants to experience by himself, or by himself with his crew. The way that he says, "I want to be the freest," because being the King of the Pirates makes you the freest man in the world. Just, I love that. Luffy is the embodiment of freedom, and the way he acts, the way he carries himself, the way he handles situation is just very freeing, very joyous. I really love it. But then of course you get the end to Sabaody and it's just absolute heartbreak, so there's that. Amazon Lily, there is really good highlights of Luffy's character in here, with the heart that he has and the intent, the way he is able to put others before himself, even in this situation when he's so desperate to find his crew, he's so desperate to get them back. He is still able to put himself second and put others in front of him, like Margaret, who saved him and stood up for him, and when she was turned to stone, she became his first priority. Instead of helping himself, he chose to help her. The intent he had when he heard Boa's backstory and how he was so non-judgmental about what had happened to her, and he accepted what she had said and listened to her and didn't think any less of her, which is what made her fall so madly in love with him. And we see him being so helpful, and how he is so thankful for those who want to help him, and that desperation of, "Oh, you're gonna help me? Oh, you have my Viva card? Oh, thank you so much." But the biggest thing in this arc is we see him be very avoidant of his feelings, and that is a big telltale of how he processes his emotions, which is very scary because of what happens in the other arcs. So we really get to see how Luffy processes things, and he is a very avoidant person when it comes to dealing with his emotions, which is very relatable. But then we get to Impel Down, and we get to see more of his desperation of trying to get to Ace now, because he found out about Ace. So now he's switched his priority to get to Ace, because that was a little more pressing at the time. And we see him get to work with others. We see how he functions with others, and again, the way he draws people to them. He draws Buggy to him. Y'all thought I wasn't gonna mention Buggy. Of course I'm gonna find an excuse to mention Buggy. He draws Buggy to him, and in like this unwitting alliance that the two start working together, and then Mr. 3 and Mr. 2, Bon Clay, like he starts drawing these people in and willing to work with them, and there's like some of them begrudgingly start to work with him, and they form this little team, this little bond, and it's part of just this air of kindness that he exudes, and this sense of just joy that he has about him. Even though he's so desperate to get to Ace, there's still this kindness that he gives to others who are willing to help him. That's why Buggy starts crying, because he's like, "Oh, you're too kind for a callous soul like me," because Buggy's drama queen, and of course he's gonna say something like that. But we also see his determination, like when he goes up against Magellan and his fight with Magellan, how he's not going to back down. We see it when he's trying to break out of the prison. He's willing to do anything it takes to get out of this prison. But we also see more of his ability to barter and come to compromises with people. That ability that Vivi kind of taught him back in Alabasta of being able to take a step back and analyze the situation to see what's best when he meets back up with Crocodile. And instead of immediately going into like fight mode with Crocodile, even though he doesn't like Crocodile, he's able to be like, okay, we can use you. You say you can get us out of here. Let's work together. Let's get out of here. And we also see further his ability to listen to others, like with Jinbei when he's attacking Blackbeard, and Jinbei stops him and says, no, you don't need to be focusing on this right now. We have to get out. And Luffy listens to Jinbei because he knows Jinbei is someone Ace respects and loves, so he automatically respects and loves Jinbei. He's able to listen to Jinbei and be like, okay, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry, let's go. But then we get to Marineford. And again, one of the biggest parts of Luffy's character is just what he won't do for the ones he loves. He will do anything, whether it be tearing his own body apart, no matter like what he's facing, whether it be poison or getting Eva's injection needles to keep himself going. He is willing to do anything for the people he loves. And that is shown again in Marineford, as he is willing to do whatever it takes to get to Ace. And we also see this conflict between him and Garp. Y'all already know my feelings on that. But of course, like, he doesn't want to hurt his grandfather. He doesn't want to go up against Garp because he knows Garp, first of all, Garp is so much stronger and could have easily defeated Luffy. But Luffy's like, please get out of my way. Like, I just want to get to Ace. I just need to get to my brother. Garp refuses, and Luffy's determination and the way he's able to see that this is something he has to do, something he has to overcome. Even if the punch he landed on Garp was kind of ineffective because Garp let it happen, Luffy was able to see it through. He was able to dig deep and push through that conflict in order to get to Ace. But we also see the panic that he has, which is how he released the Haki to save Ace. I mean, there's so much about Luffy's character in Marineford, but it's culminated in Post-War. I'm about to get there. But the bonds that he's able to make in Marineford, again, he has a way of drawing people to him. He gets all of Whitebeard's crew on his side. He gets Whitebeard himself saying, protect him, get him to Ace. He has all these people that would normally be against him, like Crocodile, teaming up with him, protecting Ace. Wild. It's wild. This boy has a draw to him that will make anybody, or that could potentially make anybody an ally. And even like afterwards, like when they're leaving, and then you get Jinbei and Law. So it's just, he has a way to draw people in. He has a way to make these bonds with people that he barely even knows. And it's such a spectacular character trait of his. But then after Ace's death, we see that avoidance of his kick in almost automatically, and the pain, the anguish, the devastation just shuts his brain down. That, coupled with all the pain his body had physically gone through, the injuries he had sustained, it just shuts his brain down because he can't process it all. He can't even begin to think about what just happened. And that leads us to Post-War whenever he wakes up. This, in my opinion, Post-War is the height of Luffy's character growth pre-time skip. It is the height of his growth. We've seen all of this growth culminate from the very beginning in East Blue, and it's been building all the way through until Post-War. And we get to this climactic point where we really see his character shift, and it makes a major shift. We see the grief. He is letting his emotions out, actually letting them out in full capacity. He is fully grieving the way he is fighting things and slamming into trees, and because he doesn't want to think about his grief. He doesn't want to think about Marineford and what he saw in Ace. He doesn't want to, so he is hurting himself to get rid of these images. But in turn, listen, Post-War still gets me very emotional. I love that arc more than Marineford, personally, because of Luffy. But then we have Jinbei facing Luffy head on, making Luffy come to reality, to face his grief, to accept what has happened, to accept what all is going on, and to have him voice it, to have him say it. And then after everything, after Luffy is just at the very bottom, he has hit the bottom and there's no further down he can possibly go. It is dark and there is nothing around him that gives him hope, until Jinbei tells him to think about what he still has. And then he says, I still have my crew. He counts them off one by one on his fingers, and he thinks about this crew that he loves, that love him, that they have gone through so much together, that they have sacrificed for him and he has sacrificed for them. The way he is still very much so willing to do anything for them as they would be for him. And that bond is what brings him back. It lifts him up away from the bottom. It brings him back towards the light, and it completely shifts his perspective on what he has to live for and what he is living for. And even though this comes with his acceptance of how weak he is, of how much he has to grow in order to protect his friends, it also shows the length of what he will do in order to get that strength, which is why when Rayleigh shows up, he is willing to accept Rayleigh's training, because he doesn't want a repeat of Sabaody, of Marineford. He cannot take another repeat. Honestly, my personal opinion, I don't think Luffy could be able to withstand another devastating loss like he had in Marineford. I haven't gotten to the present, so I don't know. But because of how deeply he cares and how he feels things, I don't think he can take a huge loss as big as Ace, like something like that. If one of his crew members were to die, that would be a devastating blow for him. And that is why, with that fresh in his mind, he is able to say, no, I can't go back to them now. Not because he was too ashamed to face them, but because he knew that if he went back to his crew, this family that he loved so dearly, he could not protect them. And he could not stand the thought of not being able to protect the ones he loves and losing someone else. And in his pursuit of strength, he is gaining more power, but he's also gaining more freedom with his ability to control and learn about hockey, and how he has Conqueror's Haki and all the implications that brings along. And so we have this huge arc for Luffy's character, and seeing what he's willing to put himself through in order to be stronger for his friends so that he doesn't lose anyone else. It's just the perfect culmination of everything that's happened in pre-time skip to make the time skip Luffy so much more understandable, so much stronger, and that much more compelling. Because when we get to post-time skip, we see a Luffy who is confident and assured in himself. He is confident that he can protect the ones he loves. He is confident in his strength and his abilities, but he's not cocky about it. There is this calmness about him that wasn't there before, and now it is. He still has his silly, goofy moments. He is still very much at heart the same person, because just because characters have growth doesn't mean they can completely change personalities by the end of their growth. No, that's not how it works. People grow and change all the time, but the root of who they are doesn't change. And Luffy's core, Luffy's roots have not changed. He is still very carefree and joyous and happy and silly and goofy. However, post time skip, there is more serious undertones to his character than what was before, because the trauma still affects him. He doesn't show it very often, but we see glimpses of it. We see glimpses of what the trauma has done to him and how he still thinks about it, and the effects of it is still with him. We see how that has changed it, how his experiences have changed it, and how his training has changed him. He is still able to trust others that he deems trustworthy. He is still willing to work with others. He's still willing to do things for those he cares about, like Shirahoshi and Fishman Island, and then joining up with Law and Punk Hazard. Like, he's still willing to do all these things like he would have in pre-time skip, but there's a difference now. That 2-year gap has made Luffy more mature, as it should have. People should be more mature in a 2-year gap. But we see the maturity, the growth, the calmness, the way he is able to think things through, the way he's able to approach situations. It's so much calmer than it was in pre-time skip, and it wasn't brought on by what other people were telling him. He's taken their advice, and over the years has kind of solidified it into his own process, so that he can observe a situation without being told to, and just being like, no, this is what we need to do. It's incredible. Of course, he still gets impulsive at times. That's not gonna just change. But when it counts, when it comes to the serious moments, you can count on Luffy. He is still just as dependable, even more so. He is more dependable. He's still just as loyal, still just as determined. His determination to fulfill his dream has come back, and the way it's come back is much more within grasp for Luffy. It's not just him proclaiming he'll be king of the pirates without any idea of how he's going to do it, or any idea that his strength would be enough for it, or if he has the right people around him to accomplish it. When he tells Rayleigh that he's going to be king of the pirates and return to Sabaody when they're leaving, that confidence that he has and the smile on his face when he says it, coming from post-war when he's crying saying, king of the pirates, yeah right, I'm so weak. That change is everything. And you know it means a lot because of Rayleigh's reaction at how he tears up and starts crying because of Luffy's words. That was probably the first time Luffy said those words in 2 years. And when he said it, he meant it. He meant it with every fiber of being within himself. And he is going to accomplish his dream with the crew around him that he feels like he can protect, and he knows they're strong enough to protect him too. So that's kind of like a graph almost. It's like a chart almost of Luffy's character progression in One Piece so far. I'm almost finished with Punk Hazard, so I know he's going to continue to grow. But the amount of growth that he's displayed, the character that he is, how he wants to be king of the pirates, but he wants to be the freest man in the world. He wants to be free with the ones he chooses around him. He is loyal to a fault almost. And he loves his crew fiercely. He loves them as a family, and he treats them as a family. And I love the bond that he has with them. This joy that he has just draws people to him and makes others want to help him. He has this way of drawing people to him that is just so inexplicably cool. I really love that aspect to his character. And the protectiveness that he feels for others, not just his crew, like of course it's his crew, but he protects those he cares for, like Vivi, Shirahoshi, just off the top of my head, Konis from Skypiea. He was willing to do anything for them. Anything, because he cared for them. He was willing to protect them. He was willing to do anything for them. He has grown to listen to others, not just on like little things, but on very big things as well. Like he's more apt to listening now than he was maybe at the beginning of the series. He's determined. He is a brave person. And he's true to himself. He always has been and he always will be. He is very true to himself. He doesn't let others influence how he's supposed to act. He is Luffy, and nobody can tell him to act anything other than who he is. And he is, like I said, he's still very goofy. He has his funny moments. He's got a great sense of humor, and his jokes always land with me. I always find them funny. But the further we get into the series, while he's still goofy, those undertones to his character are so much more serious than they were when we first met him. His crew is his family, and he will do, I think this is probably the biggest part of his character, is that he will do anything to protect the ones he loves. And I think that makes him a fantastic character. All of those traits make him a wonderful character. So that is my video over Luffy. This is, I said brief character analysis, this is definitely not brief. But this is my thoughts on Luffy as a character so far. What do you think about Luffy as a character? If I missed anything big, please let me know in the comments. I was trying to wrap it up as quickly as possible. So let me know down in the comments, what do you think of Luffy as a character? Is he one of your favorite characters? Is he one of your favorite main characters? He's one of mine. He's one of my favorite characters. Let me know down in the comments. If you liked this video, please let me know. I will be doing more Straw Hat character analysis the further I get into the series, but Luffy was the first one I wanted to tackle. I wanted to give his character a go before I got even further into the series because there's so much to talk about with him. So let me know who of the Straw Hats would you like to see next. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching this video. Be on the lookout for my Punk Hazard review that will be next Thursday. And other than that, again, thank you so much, and I will see you next time, scholars. Bye!